Hi, I'm Jeff White, the Minister of Music at Trinity Lutheran Church in St. Louis, Missouri. Today we're going to have a discussion about technology for use in the church. Originally, when I was approached by our festival committee, they had suggested that maybe I talk about using apps, but I've decided that I want to go somewhere different with this. So we're going to talk about worshiping during a pandemic, which involves not only the music staff, but also our pastoral staff. With me today are several of our staff members, and I'll let them introduce themselves in just a moment. One of the things I want to preface our conversations with is that what we're going to talk about happened to fit our situation and our resources that we had available. For your individual situations, things might be a little bit different monetarily, maybe as far as your human resources goes. But my hope is that through this discussion that maybe it might spark some ideas for your own particular situations in your congregations. And I would encourage you, if you would like, to share this video with your leadership as well. So starting with my left, I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Brenda Wilson, and I'm the Operations Manager here at Trinity.
My name is Andrea Recker. I'm the Director of Christian Education.
This is Josh Hatcher, and I'm the Senior Pastor.
Thank you all for joining me. I appreciate you taking time out of your day for this. So one of the things I wanted to talk about first is where we were as a congregation as far as our use of technology before the pandemic started. And anybody who wants to pick up on that may. So Andre, you've been here the longest, I think, out of all of us. So you probably arrived on the scene with some things that were already in place, but maybe you had some things that you brought into this. And then Pastor Josh joined us in January of 17, and I came on board just a couple of months before that as our Associate Director of Music at the time. So what was our situation like as far as what we were using social media or technology-wise?
So before the pandemic, we had a Twitter account, an Instagram account, a Facebook account, and we also had a website. For the most part, our social media was used to advertise things that were coming or that things that we had just done. So look at the cute children finding Easter eggs sort of type thing was sort of the summation of where we were.
Exactly. Josh, you have any thoughts about that too, or when you came on?
Well, Andrea was running the whole technology department when I got here. And so since Brenda came on in early 2018 or 2019, we've lived a decade since then. The two of them have really spearheaded our digital ministry. Most of our virtual stuff before the pandemic was geared toward pushing in-person ministry, community fellowship, worship, events, Bible studies, stuff like that. So it was seen as sort of a front porch, but still very much to push in-person preferences toward ministry.
Exactly. And just to kind of preface what our congregation was like. So we're basically considered an inner city church. And there was probably a time when Trinity was actually in danger of closing because we had just had people moving away from the city and going out into those suburban congregations. However, since then, in the last 20 years, would you say, that our congregation really has grown and blossomed. So what we have here is a very active ministry within our neighborhood and also within the St. Louis region itself. Just to kind of give a sense of where we are technologically, we are a very acoustic congregation. And by that, I mean that we use our sound system primarily for vocal projection as opposed to having instruments hooked up to it and so forth. We use a pipe organ here. We use grand pianos here. So not a lot of use for technology within the four walls of our worship space here. But let's move into where we were in March of last year. So as we began to hear more and more about the possibility of closing things down, we had some difficult decisions to make ourselves on how we were going to keep worship going. And I may be a little bit biased, but I personally think that where we started from to where we are today, we've made some remarkable strides, not only within our four walls, but outside of that. But let's talk a little bit, if we could, about where we were, what conversations were had with the leadership as far as what do we do right now. So in March, what did that look like for us?
I remember being at a meeting the week before March 14th, which give or take a couple of days, in my head at least, was sort of shutdown day. And there were a group of us that got together, and the question was asked, how many of you guys are still having in-person worship this upcoming weekend. And at the time, Brenda, you remember this, at the time we had sort of put a bunch of stuff in place to register people for worship. We had added a couple of weekend masses for people to come to. We'd done a ton of stuff to fall within the range of the 50, wasn't it, that could show up at a time. And so, me being me, as like, we're still having worship. I'm so excited. That meeting was in the morning. And at 1 o'clock, the mayor had a press conference and shut everything down. We're down to 10 people per weekend or per, at a time in a space. And that was it. It was very sort of slow drip of regulation until then. And being community minded, we were going to follow whatever restrictions were put in place for the good of our community and for the health of our people. So at that point, we had to adapt. What are we going to do for worship that's happening in 2 days? So Andrea got sort of the ball and just started running with it. We filmed everything. When was it? Was it that weekend? That seems like 100 years ago. How did we do that? Did we film that Saturday?
We wanted two things to happen. We wanted people to be able to worship virtually, but we also wanted to have a way to talk to our members on a daily basis. And we were going to do that through a devotional method, so just to give people a little bit of calm and peace in their day, because a lot of things were changing. And so we thought just sort of a time for them to come to the Lord and just calm down. So after our horror scene of a worship service thing, Josh and I sat down and we call them a Trinity Minute. They're supposed to be a 3-minute devotional. And we spent the next 3 hours trying to figure out how to do that on video and how to get the audio to match up. And that became a huge task. We would film it, and then we'd realize that it didn't work. And then we'd refilm it in a different way, and it wouldn't work. And it ended up that you need to spend the cash to get the right system, because people aren't going to watch something that the audio doesn't sound good at, or that the picture is grainy.
So quality was very important.
Yes.
Throughout all of this.
Yes.
So the first one that we did, and Brendo, you were part of we huddled in to the sanctuary that we lovingly called Studio T for a little while when people couldn't come in. And we would all huddle around this little cell phone to do the liturgy, like to speak liturgy so that people could worship along at home. So it wasn't just like watching a movie. We're actually inviting people into a worship experience. But if you remember, we started out, the only audio that we had was one of my old Bluetooth headsets that was meant to talk on the telephone, like while you're driving. And it sounded like we were recording the whole thing in a cave. So,
And there was a 3-second delay between the lips. It was like a bad dubbed
Yeah.
Japanese movie, Godzilla sort of type thing happening.
It was fantastic. It was awful.
I think it's safe to say that neither of you had this in your schooling to do something like this. You have both been working outside of your wheelhouse, basically, to really do that. One of the members once told me that one of our first services was without music, and I honestly don't remember that. At the time that this all started, there were actually two of us. Wes Kasulke was our music director, and I was the associate. And so we took turns in filming these various things. But I do remember that one of the early things we did is that we would come in, say on a Monday, and record the hymns on the organ, and then they would just play that back to the people, which was kind of neat because that gave us the ability to put in the words as people could sing along then with the hymns.
Yeah.
How did you determine where the best place to display this would be? So we went to the social media and really used that. And because our services were pre-recorded, you also then had it premiere at a certain time, and we were able to do some live chatting with that. What do you feel how did that work as far as your being able to connect with your congregation?
Brenda was really the logistical guru in terms of not just scheduling the people to come in and do their parts, that they would volunteer in worship so we could film them. But I remember we had a ton of conversations at our staff meetings about where are people going to engage this, and whether it was going to be on YouTube, which originally we started on, was just exclusively on YouTube. And Facebook. We figured out how to do video directly to that social media platform. But then we eventually integrated a ton of that into our website. So having that be a central hub for people to go to, and Brenda, you were really instrumental in making that happen so that everybody had one place to go.
Yeah, about a year ago, it just happened that we redid our website, and that was just, one of those blessings that happen when you don't know what's gonna, come the next year.
Sure.
So, and that's always kind of been my focus, to help point people to one place to look for the Trinity Minute, for the sermons and the live streaming. So they could go to one place, and that worked well.
And also, more importantly, she set it up so that people could give their offerings online. So there wasn't a couple month gap that we were just hanging there. But maybe to further, how did we decide which social media to go out on? And some of it's limited by the actual platform. So Twitter's more of not really a place that you would not release a video on. That's all typing and releasing type stuff. Instagram does not allow a live feed until you get like 10,000 plus subscribers. So we're nowhere there. And then for YouTube, you just have to have 100 people subscribe. So we went through everyone on our phone, and I just texted everyone and said, could you please subscribe to our Facebook, or to our channel? So, and that would allow us to upload videos like we had been doing. And Facebook, of course, is just, they don't care what they put out there. So Facebook and YouTube just became the natural, just based on who they are and how they're set up to do.
Can you talk a little bit about the congregational response? Because I know one of the difficulties that you had, all of us had, was being able to connect with the people at that time. So thinking back to how they responded to that, but also how you were able to minister to them through the media.
You get a lot more proactive. So and you don't know this until a pandemic hits and you don't see those faces on a regular basis. But you can't underestimate how many spiritual direction invitations, how many check-ins initiate with our already set gathering space. So you start on a Sunday morning, you start on a Saturday night, and you can kind of tell who needs to talk and who doesn't, and you can initiate that contact there. When that goes away, it's just a bunch of text messages, man. You're like a 14-year-old sitting in a home office from March until June, just thumbing away to check on people, make sure they're doing okay. And we moved most of our administrative meetings, most of our counseling sessions, all of that went virtual just like that. Bible studies were the same way. So during the worship services, for the 3 months that they were exclusively online, we would live chat those. We would be able to DM people in the midst of that just to check in one-on-one, because you kind of think, or at least most of them are in that one virtual space. We also opened up a bunch of Zoom sessions afterward just to decompress after worship. Listen, anybody who wants to come in, and we'll drink coffee in our pajamas on the couch in our own homes, and we'll be able to connect that way. It becomes much more proactive, care does. You have to almost check in on people and open the door for them to ask for more spiritual care. And if I can say, and us too, I mean, this has been an adjustment. All of our systems have been taken out from under us, our routines. This is not just, and I'm saying this because we're still in the middle of it, it's not just a health crisis. I mean, this is a social crisis. And so for us, our role within that as people who can't, give out remdesivir on the corner, our job is to keep people calm and steady and make sure that the centrality of our spirituality, like that steadiness and the peace of Christ, is still very much alive in a community that's realizing their need for it more and more by the day.
Absolutely. And it brings you into another point that I was going to mention, is that I know for the music department, we've been using Zoom. We're having a weekly choir party, so to speak, where the choir members could just come and go as they please. And for myself personally, I took that on just so I could enable them to do that. And it's been very well received. Back then, that was a little bit more important. Today, I think people are Zoom weary, but there's still a lot of activity on that as well. So some of the things that we had to do, you touched on this just a little bit, for our physical space, for those early days, you mentioned the sound was a problem. What are some of the things we had to do for those recordings in order to get us to make them more quality that was?
So Brenda took care of a lot of this, but it's a 20-year-old building here. So to get Wi-Fi into the sanctuary, we had to get a new soundboard. We had to get a HDMI camera that was capable, and Brenda took all of that upon herself. So, I don't know.
Well, basically, all I did was listen to what the ministry staff needed, and I researched, and just as things changed, we changed with it. That's all we could do.
Say that again.
When things changed, we changed with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because that's one of the things, we'll get into where we are now, but as Andrea pointed out, we did need a new soundboard. And if you were to watch our live stream videos, that the sound is amazing because we actually have this going through to the internet. Our sound system is hooked up that way, and I'll let you talk about that in a little bit here, just because it's an interesting way that we have adapted ourselves, to Brenda's point. So let's talk about that, kind of moving toward the live stream. So today, around sometime middle of June, we had decided that we would allow for live worship. We are strict in our requirement that everybody must wear a mask. We have very, very reduced singing. We try to limit our services to 30 to 45 minutes. And I think it's been well received, but we did move into the live streaming space as well, which required some additional modifications, not only to the building, but also to how we operate. Let's talk a little bit about that. So when was that decision made? How did you come to the point where we were able to come in here? And I'll just, by the way, preface that we're not wearing masks today because we're all in each other's bubble. But we normally do stay socially distanced from each other and masked when we're not doing something special like this.
So our South City Churches network decided in May that we were all going to open up together June 7. And during June, I'm talking about March to June, that period was so tense and the information was so scattered in terms of what was safe, what was healthy, what was communally responsible, all of it, that we weren't really making decisions based on a wealth of information that we have right now. What we decided to do here was to give that an extra week for a couple reasons. The first was to make sure that people in the city were going to follow the regulations that we had put in place. And I say that's still this way right now, but there is a divide in terms of how culture as a whole is handling the regulations that are put in place. What we were trying to avoid was a mass influx of folks who weren't going to follow the guidelines, that was going to present its own need for adjustment. So we gave the city a week, and then we started worshiping the week after. At the time, we had people registering, and poor Brenda was dealing with all these seating charts and trying to make sure that we had places for everybody to go. We went to our regular schedule. We usually have a small Saturday night service that would normally worship between 30 and 50. We have a 8:15 service, an early one in the morning that usually caps at about 35 or 40. And then we would have a 10:15 service, which is the main worship experience at the church. We were really hoping to not have a problem at 10:15. That service would go anywhere between 170, 180 in a non-pandemic worship setting. So we were trying to move people from one service to the other. We were trying to get people to register beforehand so that we knew what pews we could put them in, marked off every other pew for distance and things like that. We didn't know how many people to expect. So going into that, we didn't see it as sort of a raising of the restrictions. Everything's back to normal now. Everything's fine. There's a little camera that we had put right there, right behind me here on the balcony, that we see as another room full of people, almost like a satellite campus. So you've got the people who are in the room, but in terms of tone and timbre, there's a whole nother room of people right behind that little box. And it takes a lot in terms of emotional adjustment to talk to that box as if it is a person. And that, I think, for me was the hardest thing, was just being mindful that there are more people worshiping than you can see. I'm still making that adjustment, to be honest with you.
Sure.
I think we were very intentional about like where we were shooting, and so before people were in the building, we had released a video of here's exactly a walkthrough of what you're going to experience, because it was this apprehensiveness of what's going to happen if I walk into the church. And so we were trying to make it as normal as possible. And so even before that, we were intentionally, for our Trinity Minutes, or even when we were filming and editing the worship service, we wanted to show you parts of the church that you would have been sitting in anyway, just to help bring them back into, this is what the neighborhood is still looking like. Look, the leaves have fallen, the leaves are now growing back again. Here's what, this is what the view looks like from where you would sit. And so we were very intentional of just trying to bring people back into the sanctuary with the camera, just to help, to give them that memory.
So in order to do that, we've had to use some other services out there that are available. How did you research those, Brenda? Like the Boxcaster system that we use right now, that we're actually recording our audio on right now. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to decisions on those?
Well, sure. I noticed, because we have a limited staff, we needed something that wasn't going to take too many people to run. And so I looked into a couple of different companies and asked other churches also what they were using. And the most positive remarks I heard was a company, and I had them come in and take a look at the sanctuary, and we talked about what the easiest system would be for us, because it's basically 2 on a Sunday to run it, and came up with this Boxcast, and it programs it. It's ready to go already now for Sunday, and Wednesday actually. Right today, it'll video and record. That's the way I went. So it's ready to live stream. So
very good.
Yeah.
And we do use these systems in order to do that for our 10:15 worship service. That just seems to be the most popular one. And to Josh's point, I mean, that, as he said, on the average, we get over 170 people here on a Sunday. So that's why we use the registration process. And I think we did that through Church Community Builder, right? Which is our church administration software.
It is, yes. We can create forms there, and it can take reservations, and then we can track how many people and who is going to attend a service also. So, and in these times, contact tracking is a help. So
one of the reasons why we got away from using the reservation system is simply because we weren't getting the numbers we were worried about. St. Louis City recommends 50% of capacity, and you can't tell it from the number of pews you can see in this video, but Trinity can hold about 400 people. We opted to actually keep it at 25% just to mitigate any possibility of becoming a problem here as far as spread goes. And we've been very, very successful in that, I believe, with the mask rule, and we have every other pew roped off downstairs. And at first we were actually seating people. The ushers sat people where to go, but we've relaxed a few of those things just to make life a little easier for us. But we followed protocols very strictly in what we said we were going to do. And we have a no tolerance policy as far as those masks are concerned, this video aside. So we have this camera. It's a single camera, as Josh mentioned. It's fixed on the balcony rail. It can be panned and zoomed around the room, so it can do different things as far as where it's pointing at. We typically move the camera away from the congregation, and we also respect their privacy by not showing people on the screen deliberately. We keep it pretty much focused on the chancel area. And then during communion, we actually move it up to the one of the big windows typically that you can see behind Andre there. How has the response been as far as that goes? I mean, when you compare November, say, to March?
There was, at first, and you see this with all forms of virtual ministry, the Zoom sessions, our online Bible studies, with the exception of your women's Bible study that has just exploded. But for the most part, there was an adrenaline rush when this first started. where people were flocking to this new thing that they could do. And this isn't just our parish, this is across Christendom for the most part. People would, watch every video, and they would live chat every video, and they'd be there waiting for this thing to drop, before it did. Around May, a couple weeks after Easter, is where you see this collective crash, not just in terms of church life and congregational liturgical life, but in our whole society. You see this often in disaster responses. After a couple of months of newness, the exhaustion wears in. So what we're seeing right now in November is this sort of, people are getting used to it. I don't want to call it a second wave of involvement, but there is this sense that we are going to do ministry this way for a little while. This isn't something that we're doing as a stopgap before we can go, quote, back to normal. Right now, this is normal. And what happens in June when a vaccine starts to be widely available, and in September, those won't be going back to normal either. Those will be new normals that we're continuing to roll out. And I think, Brenda, what you said a couple of minutes ago is really key to this whole thing. When things change, we adapt. And candidly, between these two and Steve, you and Wes at the time, you guys all adapted, changed the way we did stuff. And there was never a mourning of what had been. It was always, we had meetings at the outset of this thing, we had meetings every other day. Here are the regulations now, what do we do? We would spend hours trying to map out a pathway for ministry. Regulations would change. Plan gets torn up and thrown out the window. What are we going to do next? So there was constant prayer, constant discussion, constant adjustment. And I think our people, by and large, reacted the same way. They were able to receive all of that in a very prayerful and open way. And they still do. I would say a third of our community right now is in person, and the other 2/3 is still very much online.
But you could say, too, based on the numbers that we see in our views and so forth, that we're reaching people that aren't members here. For instance, we have on our live stream, they can, of course, chat on Facebook, and we see greetings from Iowa. There was Kansas in there, Oklahoma, I think, at one point, too. A couple people got in there.
We usually
Nebraska.
have about 7 to 10 states represented on worship.
And that's amazing, because that really thinks about getting outside of these four walls and into the church, capital C. So that's kind of an amazing thing. And I think as a congregation, even when things get back to normal, if we can use that word, that we'll probably continue these live streams in order to continue to reach those people, not only just those who are out of the area, but those who can't come to church. Because computers are very present even in the folks that are shut in for health reasons or whatnot, that can still be participating in our worship services, even if remotely.
That, I think, is going to be the fun part, is to figure out how many people will get up in the morning, get dressed, have a cup of coffee and breakfast, and then come in. There's a sense that waking up in the morning and worshiping with a cup of coffee in your hand, in your pajamas on the couch, that's a good deal if you can get it. So there may be a couple of weeks there where we have a few technical difficulties and aren't able to stream, just to put a few glitches in the system.
So our intent is to make it good enough that you can worship, but just that you probably want to go sit in the pew.
Thus the one camera, by the way. We were very intentional about that. And Brenda and Andrea really drove the bus in terms of what that production quote would look like, that it wouldn't look like a television show. When we had done virtual worship exclusively, it was produced. For the sake of attention spans and involvement, we would go through and put all the words to the liturgy and the hymns at the bottom of the screen so people could sing along. It was like a, DVD you would get or something like that. When it came to the live worship that we're doing here in the building and having people participate from the outside, we were very intentional. There will be one camera. one angle. It won't be that well, quote, produced, because we're just letting people in for worship. We wanted to move away from the sort of high production value that we had done when everybody was online, and given people a window into something that's happening, that's meaningful, that you can be a part of once we all get our vaccines.
Exactly. And I know for myself, speaking for myself as the organist, I really like that we're back in person at least and doing the live stream as opposed to the videos that they would make would be multi-angle, and we would recreate things that, like the cross procession down the, you'd see all the empty pews and it was just kind of strange, but at the same time it was what we had at the time, and we made it work. Andrea, you probably were impacted more than Josh or I as far as ministry goes, having to take Christian education in a different direction. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you've been doing to try to continue your ministry?
So for Sunday school and confirmation classes, the confirmation parents weren't ready to have their kids back, and the Sunday school teachers weren't ready to teach a room full of children that are all coming from 20 different school districts to spread whatever they have. So we had to make some decisions. And so we have a falling down school building next door to us. So we created a green screen in there, and we bring in our Sunday school teachers and they film in front of the green screen, and we produce a 10-15 minute Sunday school lesson each week. And then also Josh and I put together a confirmation homeschooled confirmation process now for our kids. So it was just having the right, once I found out that iMovie had the green screen capabilities, it opened the world up to us. It's like all of a sudden because before that we would email a paper, here's your Sunday school lesson, good luck figuring it out. And at the end of the summer, we found out iMovie has green screen capabilities, and it just sort of opened our eyes to why didn't we know this 3 months ago, sort of type thing. So knowing what your technology can do opens up a lot of doors.
Right, exactly.
But like taking our Bible studies on Zoom was very important too. You can't do Zoom like you would in person. And so it's a lot of just letting them chat for a while and interact and play, and it's you don't do it like it's in person.
And one thing we did discover is that we cannot sing the doxology together at the end of a meeting on Zoom, just so you all know. So let's, as we get ready to wrap up here, let's start. Brenda, if you had a peer at another church come to you and say, what advice can you give me? What would you tell them?
I would say for me, I listened a lot, and from what I heard ministry staff say, then that's what I would look into. And I belong to a church administrative group too, and we were all doing the same things, even though we were all had different sized churches and different ways of doing ministry. Some had already done live streaming forever, and we had not, and so that helped me, to connect by being connected with them also.
Sure.
And I know a lot of things are going to be changed when we're through with all of this, but I think it's been an opportunity and a challenge both, because I think the things that we are doing and doing well are going to continue, and some of the things that maybe we should have let go already, we're going to have let them go.
Sure. Sure.
So I think it's a good refining time. And that's what I would tell someone that asked me.
Absolutely. Thank you. Andrea, how about you? What would you tell a fellow director of Christian education?
I would say you have to have a Brenda, but you can't have ours.
Nope.
The importance of the flowchart, know where you want to end and then what pieces it takes to get there. So in order for us to get a camera to film 3 months ahead of time, Brenda got a $5,000 grant. And then once we got the $5,000 grant, then that allowed the rest of the pieces. And then, you want to know that you would have needed several new routers to bring out the internet people, like all of the different pieces that it takes in order to get stuff done. So like we've already written 2 grants in order to help make this happen. And then just trying, know where you want to end, and then mapping backwards all of the different pieces that it takes to get there.
And we've had a lot of support from our council members and our executive leadership within the congregation. So that was a very helpful thing too, is having everybody on board for that. Thank you. Josh, what do you think?
I'd say three things. The first one is trust your team, because you got a group of folks who all have different perspectives, not only from the user end, but also in terms of engaging their own spirituality and perspectives on how people can do that, and also the technical know-how of how to make that happen. So for example, you've got Andrea, who is the driver of this thing, our video producer. She's the one who was watching YouTube videos on how to make YouTube videos, the one who was researching lighting. It was about a weekend where she just came in and said, all right, I've learned how to do this. Bam. It was beautiful. Brenda is the logistical mastermind. She knows how all of this stuff works, where the gears are, and how to set up systems that can help us fulfill whatever ministry we're called to do. We've got Pastor Albers, who's not here with us today, who is the one who keeps our community together. He's got the ethos of the group, right? So when he speaks and when he's the one who drives calm into those vehicles, whatever they are, there's a level of calmness that comes with him. You adapted like a boss. To be able to take what we do for worship, take the people out of it, and still be able to lead people in song across time and space without ever complaining and without ever second guessing. This is what we're doing. Let's make it happen. So number one, trust your team. Number two, be comfortable failing. There's a pathway here. I feel like what we produce in terms of a worship experience for people who are at their homes, I feel like it's pretty good. It hasn't been that way since March. There was a process. There was a season where our sound was terrible. There was a season where we couldn't figure out how to get our videos to sync up to where everybody could come and worship together. It was fine. So when I say don't be afraid of failure, another way to say that would be don't let what's perfect stand in the way of what is worshipful. Let worship drive the bus, not necessarily the production value of the thing. And number three, I would say be yourself. What ministry is and what it requires of us, all of these things are away games. Being honest about that and being yourself in the way that we project into people's homes, in the way that we ask people how they're doing, pretending like we know what we're doing and that we're keeping it together 100% isn't going to get us anywhere. We have to minister from the people that God has made us to be. So those three things.
Very good. Thank you. And just a little bit about our congregation. We have from age 0 all the way up to age in the 90s. And a lot of these folks have gotten on board with this. Those that are coming to church maybe aren't the ones who should be coming to church, but again, since we stay masked and everything, we've kept them safe and have been very successful in that. So I am totally amazed by all of you. I think I am such a blessed person to be a part of this team, and I'm very honored to be here, and I thank you for your time and being with us. On the Saturday session that we do live, you'll be able to meet with me. It'll be more of a sharing of ideas time. You can ask questions of me. I will try to answer them based on what I know. And if I don't, I will get those answers back to you. But I'm looking forward to speaking with you all on the Zoom session and hope that you all have a great day. Thank you.